It was strange how much my feelings for Betty shifted when she was no longer visibly in my sight. She had been a constant in my life since the beginning of the spring semester, although it felt as if I had known her for an eternity. I had found Betty to be absolutely intoxicating, a rare gem in an otherwise dull sea of faces. The way that she smiled at me and the way that she gazed into my eyes was absolutely tantalizing. Her eyes were the ocean, calm in times of peace, and a tempest when she was angry. Her waves crashed all over me, and I was powerless in her wake. Being with Betty was akin to indulging in my greatest desires over and over again. She was my reason to be, my sole reason to live. I breathed in her perfume as if it were the oxygen that I needed in order to survive. And when she was gone, it was as if I had no willpower of my own. The longer that I dated her, and the longer that I got wrapped up in her scent, the deeper my obsession for her grew. Whenever she took her time to respond to my text, I would feel a sense of madness rush over me. I often found myself worrying about what she was doing, if she was okay, and if she would break up with me. For me, it was more than a want to be around her. It was a sort of pitiful need. I was irrevocably hers, and I needed frequent doses in order to survive. It didn't take long before my desperate desire grew to a point where I began to stalk her. The first time that she caught me, I was able to pass it off as a cute, random happenstance. However, it was impossible for me to fabricate a convincing reason for why I was parked outside of her home at 10 p.m. She broke up with me because of it, but for me, there was no moving on. I continued tracking her like a skilled beast tracking its prey. Much to my delight, she kept primarily to her small circle of friends after we broke up and refused any guy that asked her to the prom. When I found out that she was going to the prom with friends, I opted to buy a ticket as well, just for a chance to win her back. Betty knew that I hated crowds, and I wondered if she would find it heroic that I decided to come to the dance after all. I had it planned that I would keep my distance from her, and if her favorite song came on, then I would come and ask her to dance. My jaw practically dropped to the floor when I saw her. She was stunning that night in a turquoise dress that fit her like a glove. I kept my distance, as I had planned, and watched her patiently from afar as I tried my best to blend in with a crowd of other people who thought that they were too cool to dance. It was hard to keep track of Betty when she began dancing, and after a while, I had to cave and ask someone to dance so that I could get a better look. I saw Jules standing by herself, and I asked if she wanted to dance. She seemed delighted, but I had no intention of continuing the evening with her. When Betty's favorite song eventually came on, I excused myself from Jules and began to make my way to where Betty was standing with her friends. She was looking for someone, and my heart pounded swiftly against me as I called out to her. My voice, however, was lost to her as Tyler made his approach. I watched in horror as he caught her attention, and she smiled at him in the way that she used to smile at me. My face was a sure look of bitter disappointment as I quickly left the gym. I went home and scoured social media to get a sense of what Betty could possibly see in Tyler. but there was nothing that I could find that made him particularly special. There was no reason that a guy like Tyler should even be looking at Betty, let alone be allowed to touch her or be anywhere near her. My territorial sense of unease ate at me until I could no longer sit idle. Something had to be done to quell my anger and to make her mine once again. Tyler lived close to the school, and he would often walk home after. From Facebook, I knew that he was a theater kid and that he stayed at the school for practice of a Midsummer's Night's Dream. I waited patiently for the moment when the moon was full and the opportunity for stealth in the moonlight seemed at its most ideal. He never saw it coming, what I did next, as from seemingly out of nowhere, I began making purposeful, scathing marks upon his skin. I could have killed him, but instead, I decided to teach him a lesson. I ripped and teared at his arms until his fingers were crushed and his arms were mutilated and twisted in a sickening fashion. It would be a long time before he was able to touch anyone again without feeling excruciating pain, let alone Betty. The rumor started by Ines about the attack seemed so improbable to the point of being flatly ludicrous that no one believed her. She said that she had visited Tyler in the hospital and that he told her that he had been attacked by some sort of wild animal with human-like characteristics. If anyone other than Ines would have made the claim, then the rumors may have seemed less far-fetched. But luckily for me, she had a tendency to believe in the supernatural and other cryptids. It wasn't as if I was actually worried that I would be traced back to the attack, but it was reassuring to know that no one believed the truth behind it. What was surprising was that it took minimal effort on my behalf to win back Betty's attention. I called her one day after the attack under the guise of pretending that I wanted to check in on her. She told me that she felt terrible about it, that some sick part of her was actually relieved that he had been attacked. She said that he had treated her poorly and that she was happy to finally have him out of her life. I hadn't the slightest idea what she was talking about, and it didn't matter. Whatever it was that had caused her ire had worked beautifully in my favor. Betty was back in my life, and she was more affectionate than ever. She was quick to respond this time around, and she seemed more eager to push her previous sexual boundaries with me, claiming that I made her feel safe, and she wanted it to be me when she was finally ready, and that it really turned her on to think about how territorial I was of her. My mom was gone in the evenings often with her job, and she would often sneak out of her house to stay the night at mine. Between the bed sheets, I promised her my devotion, and I felt like the luckiest person alive to be desired by her. The news that she was leaving for the summer nearly left me speechless. She laughed when I pleaded to go with her and promised that she would be back soon. She promised to call me often, and she made me promise not to kiss anyone else while she was gone. It was impossible to say no to her, and I had no desire to be with anyone else. I swore my devotion to her once again. "You're like a devoted pup," she laughed as I teasingly nibbled at her ear and let out a soft howl for her amusement. When she left, I found her old cardigan in my bedroom, and I would often bring it to my face in an attempt to breathe her in like a memory quickly fading. I spent the first week without her in a miserable state, but by the second week, I was ready to go outside and be back in the sun. I smelled her perfume-scented cardigan and placed it back on my bed before grabbing my skateboard. Not sure of where I wanted to go, I thought of Betty and began skating towards her house out of habit. But before I even made it halfway, I was stopped by Jules. She pulled up beside me in her dark tinted car, rolled down her window, and told me to get in. I had never really looked at Jules before, and I felt an unexpected nervous rush of excitement flood over me like a figment of my worst intentions. Jules was a perfect distraction to my obsessive devotion to Betty, and it did not take long before we were spending our days together, and eventually our nights. It wasn't as if I didn't think about Betty, but my desire for her had almost completely faded like perfume on a cardigan discarded under the bed. I was reluctant to break up with Betty over the phone, but eventually Jules was able to convince me that breaking up with Betty over the phone was better than her coming back home and hearing from someone else that I had been cheating on her all summer. The day that I meant to call, I rode my skateboard past her house for nostalgia's sake. Like an onslaught of horrendous ludicrousy, I felt my breath escape from me as I stopped in front of her house. My deadly desire flooded me like a crack that had been broken open that consumed me once again. It was as if I had been pulled out of my state of oblivion and was looking into my memory's abyss once again. I suddenly felt as if I couldn't breathe. I had never stopped thinking about Betty, even though I had been sleeping with Jules. Jules now seemed unimportant, and all thought of breaking up with Betty felt like it would be the death of me. Betty was my reason to live, and without her, I knew that I would be nothing at all. Panic grasped at me as I realized that my infidelity could make me lose her. I closed my eyes as I tried to recall my nights and days with Jules. Had anyone seen us, or had we been careful? Could I pass it off as me being dumb and 17? Would she believe me that it was just a summer thing? Jules was my main concern. She knew that I was cheating on Betty with her, but there had been no discussion of what would happen once Betty returned and our senior year started. That night, she came over, and I could feel my stomach turning in knots as she walked into my room wearing Betty's signature cardigan. Where did you get that? I borrowed it the last time I was over. Don't you remember? Give it back! You know that that's Betty's. She looked at me with a telling sign of disgust as she shrugged it off. I thought that you said you were breaking up with her. Things changed. I don't get it, James. You seem so miserable with her, as if she were somehow controlling you. I like you, and I think that would be a good couple, but that's not why I'm saying this. I genuinely think that Betty makes you a bad person, and that you're better without her, even if you're not with me. It's like you're under her spell. I know you. You're too good for her. We make fun of Ines a lot, but she has this theory that Betty is a witch or something. You're just jealous. This thing with us was so stupid. We should have never done it. Jules didn't try to call or text again, and I was thankful for it. I spent the next few weeks thinking only of Betty, but she scarcely answered my messages and seemed distant when we did speak. It was through a mutual friend that I found out that she was having a birthday party the first weekend of the semester. She took 2 days to answer, and when she did, the text was brief. Show up if you want. It's at my house at 6 p.m. It will be in the garden. I was nervous to go to school on the first day. Betty had scarcely talked to me, and I was worried that she had somehow found out about my infidelity. We had homeroom together, and it wasn't as if she could avoid me. I brought chocolates and a handwritten note to explain everything, but on the first day of class, she was nowhere to be found. Eventually, I found out that she had switched her homeroom, and my heart dropped. There was no reason for her to have changed it, unless she was trying to avoid me. Her friend's death glare seemed to confirm my suspicions as the week progressed. I texted Jules to see if she knew anything, and she told me that Ines had spread a rumor that she had seen her wearing Betty's cardigan. I showed up to the party on Saturday unannounced, unsure of what would happen. Would Betty kiss me and show all of her stupid friends that she didn't believe the rumors? And would she lead me to the garden with everyone else? I feel nervous as I ring the doorbell. I feel a sudden wave of realization that after tonight, there would be no more dreaming of what would happen when I see her face again. I hold my breath as I agonizingly wait on the door to open, only for me to be greeted by another kid from our school. He offers me a drink that I hungrily consume, and then I have several more until I am unable to remember my own anxieties. Desperately, I begin searching for Betty and am delighted to see her on the bench swing in the garden. When I approach, her friends get up and leave so that we can be alone. She tells me that she heard the rumors from Ines, and she gazes into my eyes, trying to see the truth within them. I decide not to lie to her, and I catch myself telling her the whole story. She listens with a patient sorrow as I tell her how sorry I am and that I love her. She thanks me for being honest and then asks for me to leave so that she can think things over. She tells me that she knows that I love her and that she knows that I am hers, that I am completely under her control, and that she knew that I was the one that had hurt Tyler for her. Once I am back at home, I receive a text from Jules asking if she can come in. I tell her yes, glad for the opportunity for a distraction from my thoughts. But before I can stop her and tell her that I don't want anything physical, she's already on top of me, tugging and kissing at my lips and neck. I try to pull her off of me, and she just laughs and tells me to calm down. Something seems wrong. Her skin is cold, and she doesn't feel the same way as she has in the past. Her actions seem calculated and robotic, and not at all as graceful or seductive as I had known her to be. I shove her off of me and tell her to get off, but she's quick and soon proceeds with what she was doing. I feel her teeth sinking into my skin, and I can feel the blood draining from my face. Soon my body feels cold, and my eyes lull back as she whispers in my ear, "Betty made me do this. She said that me sticking my fangs into you and bleeding you dry was what we both deserve. I, like you, am powerless when it comes